Welcome to Breakthrough Minds with Raj Mahapatra. I'm Raj, and I get to sit in the room where cutting-edge technology is being built. And the conversations I'm part of are just too good not to share. That's what this podcast is all about. Annie, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited about this conversation. I say this at the beginning of every podcast, how excited I am, but I mean, the thing is that we've had conversations over the last couple of years, and talk about the innovation within Wilson Sonsini. And why I'm really excited about this conversation is because when I've talked to other chief innovation officers at other law firms, I have found that they refer to what you are doing. So, before we go any further, my first question to you, and I say this to everyone, is who are you and what do you do?
So, Annie Datesh, Chief Innovation Officer at Wilson Sonsini, also former practicing attorney at the firm for many years on the corporate side and kind of full stack, so everything from startups to public company work, M&A, IPOs. And I think what I do now, I had a brief hiatus from working at Wilson to go to Atrium, where I became Director of Innovation and a Managing Counsel. So I kind of cut my technical teeth. And my role right now is, of course, manning the innovation department and heading that up at Wilson Sonsini. But also I'm head of product for the firm's Neuron product, which is a proprietary software platform that we're building, similar to what we were trying to do at Atrium. But within the Wilson Sonsini umbrella. Amazing.
And that's great, because you're giving me a full spectrum, but not quite full. Because the one thing you've missed out in for me is what you did at university, the first thing you did, which was neuroscience and behavioral innovation.
Right.
So tell me a bit about that side of things. I mean, you've gone from neuroscience to law and now back into innovation, and there's kind of like a loop there. Do you see it as a loop?
It's almost an accidental loop in the sense that, especially with AI, neural networks, there's a lot of neuroscience nerding out that I can do just learning about AI and neural networks. But yeah, really, I studied neuroscience because it was what I enjoyed learning about, and that just made it easy to study.
Yeah.
Thought I would become a doctor, but ended up at the last minute realizing that none of those career paths really fit with me. So I'd always thought about going to law school, and I went. And ended up, of course, at Wilson Sonsini. I think I thought I would be able to do more with neuroscience at Wilson, but I ended up on kind of the tech company side. I did some life sciences, but nothing neuro. So it was great when AI and generative AI kind of came on the scene, because now I get to think about, how does this thing I know about the brain apply to neural networks or AI and all of that. And of course, there is the behavioral piece of neuroscience that I have to be contending with in driving user behavior and change management within legal tech.
One of the things that I like about that is you've kind of touched on it without saying the word, which is intelligence, and how, we're talking about the world of AI. You started off by looking at intelligence with neuroscience, and we're coming around to that again. So maybe during the course of the conversation, we might come back to that point. But do you have any, when you thought about intelligence, when you thought about that back in when you first started your university studies, and did you ever get an idea of what you thought intelligence was?
Yeah, I think, it's really the human brain's ability to understand patterns and learn from those patterns, whether it's at the very beginnings of evolution where you're just driven by, getting food and this light, I go toward this light because there's food there, and so I keep going toward light when you're like an amoeba or something.
Yeah.
But your neural pathways are rewarding that behavior, and so you're learning from experience all the way up to human intelligence, where I realize that I need to play this game with this strategy that I just made up in my head. Because I'm realizing that it gets me good outputs. It's all kind of driven by that. Find a pattern, repeat the pattern because you're getting rewarded based on dopamine or whatever it is because of the behavior.
So when I go back to your career, and you started off in corporate securities and securities law, and that's really precise. Well, it's kind of precise. I'm not a securities lawyer, so my understanding is a very precise area, but there's precise precision, but there's also, you have to do a lot of approximations as well within it. And that, when we talk about approximation, there's heuristics involved in that. There's pragmatic solution, and you have to think about very pragmatically about the things you're delivering. When we talk about that, what did good enough mean to you?
I think that's really driven by the client, right? I mean, there are times when the client needs something quickly, cheaply, and they want it today, and you have to explain that that's not, necessarily a good idea, and that's what they want. You give the client what they want, with disclosing what that means and what the risks are. I think you end up being driven by client desires, and we think about that now, and when we're looking forward to things like how is AI going to change due diligence, maybe there are transaction types that are so immaterial that a client is okay with us using AI only on due diligence in the way that, e-discovery has kind of gone in that direction. And then there are mid-tier transactions where it's AI plus a human oversight, and then the highest tier where they want humans doing everything, or, an extra careful look by humans. I think that it's all going to be driven by client needs.
That's really interesting because, in my head, I have a kind of a story arc of how I think a conversation is going to go, and you've jumped ahead 4 steps already. And I kind of want to go there right now. So let's go there right now. You've talked about this hierarchy within that. Do you think that there's a space where the human is essential?
So right now, the human is obviously essential just because of the quality of output from LLMs. And I think if you have, LLMs being the primary version of generative AI that we're going to use in law, even if you start moving toward the kind of neurosymbolic approaches, which you might have heard of, where they're pairing traditional ML with logical-based rules with an LLM, there's still an LLM involved. So there's always going to be a risk of hallucination. That is almost always going to require an attorney for work that requires that level of precision, or where clients want that level of precision. And I think until we get past that, and things like prompt injections where the LLM or AI tool has spit something out, but somebody injected something with a prompt injection so that the indemnification provision isn't what you're expecting, only a human's going to be able to catch that right now. So I think there's going to be plenty of time where we're still going to be needed in the loop.
And this is not just relating to law, is it? I mean, this is kind of for the whole of use of AI generally, is that we need to be really aware of the importance of a human being able to give a level of oversight, I think is the word probably. Right. I've had some interesting conversation with people recently where we stopped talking about human in the loop and started talking about the human crumple zone. So someone has to take responsibility.
Right.
So who takes the fall when he gets it wrong? And if you don't have someone overseeing the document, what happens there? But I think that right now, when we think about the way in which Gen AI works and the probabilistic nature of it, we think about that curve, that distribution curve of where the bulk of the knowledge sits. And I think about all the documentation, and we are a superbly lucky firm because we have got these decades of innovation experience. But actually, within that, there's an element of precedent, and I can see how AI can really work. Gen AI can work very well with precedent, but so much of what I think this firm does, and I would say that a lot of law firms will be able to say the same thing. So much of what they are specialists in, actually sits on the ends, in those grey areas, and I think that, for me, that is the thing that we need to really kind of focus on. What lawyers do today. I mean, well, maybe it's not just today. I mean, we have to do the whole thing today, but maybe, the next evolution of Gen AI, we're going to be pushing ourselves out to those edges. Is that, what do you see it like? Or
yeah, I think, if especially you have ALSPs targeting that middle of the distribution where it might be really easy.
Sorry, ALSPs, just
alternative legal service providers.
Okay.
Targeting the middle of the distribution where it's predictable and you kind of know what to do. The edge cases are going to become more and more what law firms are needed for, because you can't just buy a tool off the shelf that's going to help you negotiate, a multi-billion-dollar JV deal or joint venture deal or something like that. You're always going to bring in a law firm to do that, because you want to make sure that no edge cases are happening in those high risk deals.
Yeah. Kind of going back to my narrative arc that I had in my head, you went from being a lawyer to now being someone who's designing or redesigning how lawyers work. How has that changed things for you?
So I think the most important piece of it for me was my experience at Atrium and my experience with product development and design thinking, because I think there's a pitfall for lawyers to just solve the problems that they knew without actually digging down into, are those the real problems that you need to solve, and asking the 5 whys and all of the things that, all of our product development folks will know well. And I think that therefore having been a lawyer and becoming someone that's working on product stuff, you sometimes can be led astray, versus having that design thinking and product development background helps me zero in on problems we actually need to solve, where are the pain points, so that you're not, for instance, solving a problem downstream that you could be solving upstream, and you spend all this time and money to solve the downstream problem, only to find later that you could have solved everything upstream and never had to spend that money.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, what's interesting for me is when you're saying that, what comes to my mind is that, do lawyers actually understand the problems they're trying to solve?
I think they are too smart and have already created so many workarounds and so many, I'll just do this really quickly because I don't have this resource, that they forget about what the actual workflow would look like in a wave of magic wand scenario.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I work with a client, and they really focus. In fact, the podcast has happened already with that particular client, and what they're focused down on is the behavioural side of how we operate, and so much of what we do is that we as experts just know what we know, and we don't know how to explain what we know. We just assume it's what everyone knows because we're so used to just doing these things.
Right.
And I find myself going through documents, and when I'm reviewing a document, and I would fly through these documents and other people watching me will go, how did you know where to stop as you were going through it and make the edits? And it's almost like a muscle memory. You just do it. And until someone stops you, you don't think about these things.
Yeah.
So so what we're trying to do, when you're trying to take AI and you're trying to get that to replicate some of those processes, unless you've got the evolution of thought within a document, how do you take what's in a lawyer's head and get that kind of that thought process, that mindfulness onto to a system?
Yeah, I think it's a very careful process because, as you said, it's tough to get that out of people's heads who have it so ingrained in them that it's muscle memory. And so there's a lot of just kind of working with them. I mean, literally the 5 whys. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? Why do you do that? And then you get drilled down into what's actually going on. Yeah. But I think making sure that you're trying to think of things systematically, and also really being iconoclastic in some ways, like how if we tore this down and rebuilt it, what would it look like? Because it's not going to look like you having to drop out of this tool to go to this tool and then bring the information from this tool in there. If everything was integrated and we were building, one system, what would that look like? So there's a lot of that type of thinking, and that is, different from the kind of lawyerly thinking in many ways. But another thing that jogged in my memory when you asked the question is just the level of forward thinking that you need to do in this role versus as an associate, especially, you're very much kind of in reactionary mode. When you're junior, mid-level, you start to get more being the quarterback on different deals, and you have to kind of be, a people person. But then senior level and above is when you get to more strategy and cross-document and cross-time strategy. So this, where I'm thinking in decades instead of days or hours to get this thing done at the end of the day, is another big change from being a lawyer to my current role.
As we're talking about this, I was thinking about these conversations where I've been in rooms where I've had senior partners of other law firms, I should be really clear, senior partners of other law firms saying to me, they've tried AI, and it doesn't get things right. So until it's perfect, we can't use it. I mean, how dangerous is that as an approach?
I think that is just in some ways going to be solved by time. People are used to, as I always say when I'm talking about this, Excel 100% right 100% of the time, unless it's a bug, unless I got the formula wrong, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they've been using for decades, Microsoft Office and other SaaS tools. This is a new paradigm where you have to supervise this technology, but people will get there. I think it's just going to take time. I don't think that we ultimately are going to have to combat that in the midterm, because I think people are going to get used to it. They're going to see the value of it. And if you're building tools where, yes, you still have to check the work, but everything else has been condensed into such an easy, simple workflow, and almost no time is spent on all of the kind of ministerial things, and you're just getting them directly to the expertise. And yes, you still have to review it all, but then that's so much less of your time, and it's so much better of a client experience or user experience. They're going to go for it.
I'm going to go completely off my script now, because this is really, I love this kind of point we've got to here, which is you keep on talking about tools. And actually, when you start talking about Excel and calculators, and they've kind of 100% right 100% of the time, because unless you've got the entrance, you've entered the data wrong in the first place. And when we think about tools, we really do think about that kind of input output precision there. And now we're talking about Gen AI, we're talking about probabilistic outputs. But what's interesting for me is how many of these new tools have got names. You're giving them names now instead. And I've seen other law firms refer to, the name of their tool named after a founder of the firm or whatever. And actually what's really interesting for me is when you start doing that, you start personifying the tool. And I'm guessing that there's kind of a benefit in doing that, which is because you're relating to it as a thing rather than as a tool, you start treating it in a probabilistic way.
Not to mention the fact that it's spitting out natural language that sounds exactly like a human. I think it's very hard not to personify a lot of these tools. But I think that the real issue is going to be learning how to supervise them, because it is, everyone who's trying to sell me a generative AI always says, well, you have to supervise a first-year associate. Yeah. And I say, yes, but I know what mistakes a first year versus a fifth year versus a ninth year are going to make. A ninth year is not going to make the little attention to detail. Should this be a comma or a semicolon? Is this bold or not? A first year might. AI could make any type of mistake at any time, and it could even make logical mistakes that a human would never make, and not even a first-year associate would make. So there's a depth to the amount of supervision that you have to do that just changes things. And so how do I supervise this effectively? Of course, the tech will get better and make it easier on folks, but how do I supervise this effectively is going to be the ultimate corner that we have to get people around to use this stuff.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree with you more, actually, on that point, because I think you do so often, realize it gets tripped up on the simplest things, and you wonder where those things have just come from. I referred to this in previous podcasts about the clock test, when you just type into actually ChatGPT is the one that does it most often, where you put in a ChatGPT, draw me an analog clock face, showing me a time, and now it's 2:30, so you say 2:30, and how it'll 9 times out of 10, if not 95 times out of 100, come back with 10 past 10. And it's not a bug, it's actually a feature, because it actually demonstrates to you how these models are trained. It's trained on the data it has available to it, and 10 past 10 is the most beautiful way of showing a clock face. So that's what you end up with every time. And I'm guessing that when you're doing language, one of the, again, we talk about bug, not, this is a feature, not a bug. When it comes to language, and something that legal has to get its head around, is that, or legal AI tools get their head around, is that these LLMs are designed not to breach copyright. But actually, as lawyers, we know that the words are chosen for a reason, and there's a precision in those words. So you don't want to stray from those words.
Right.
So these are for the legal tech companies out there. This is a challenge. Is how do you make sure we come back to those words that we know work every time?
Yeah, I mean, I think there isn't copyright on legal documents for that exact reason.
Well, absolutely.
Right? Because we want to be able to use the words that we know work or are in the code or anything like that. I think what we need is more consistency than the tools can give right now because of that exact reason. I want it to take precedent and just update the things I need it to update. Vendors will come to us and say, look, you can generate this document type using AI. And I look at them like they're crazy because no one at a large law firm is going to generate a document using AI. They're going to go into NetDocs or iManage. They're going to search for the document type. They're going to compare some precedents. Yeah. And so what I want is a tool that can either combine those precedents or help me compare them as a human so that I can then make the only changes that I need and send and ship it, because then I can be confident in that language staying the way that it should and not being crossed between two documents or something really big missing, because I know that when I look at these precedent documents drafted by lawyers who I trust in my large law firm that I trust, I can get quality output versus just winging it with vibe coding a document.
and I love vibe coding documents. I have being part of my role is doing the legal work, and so I'm sitting there looking at documents my client has generated and sent me, and they said, well, I've done a first draft.
Yes.
And you look at the first draft and you go, yeah, okay, so do I scrap it and start again? Or is it good enough for me to take this and do the next thing? And often the pressure is to actually value the client, so you don't scrap it and start again. You just okay, let me just take it from here and go forward. And I'm really mindful when I'm doing that how much you are almost reinventing some of these concepts. But actually, what I'm seeing now is more and more people out there are taking AI, generating a document, sending it to another side. The other side is then generating comments on it without actually involving lawyers particularly in it. And I know that that there are all the big LLMs are saying don't use this for legal advice. This is not legal advice. And I think people know it's not legal advice, but it's
it's cheap.
It's cheap. It's the Google Maps
Right.
scenario all over again. It's better than the alternative. Do I have to talk to a lawyer? Do I want to talk to a lawyer? But actually, there's a value in talking to lawyers. The challenge here is that as people are generating more and more documents out in the world that aren't perfect or legally as close to perfect as you would like it to be as a lawyer, is there a race to the bottom risk here?
I would say if you're a LLM out in the wild training on those documents, then there is a race to the bottom. But that, for us, is actually an advantage because our data is our competitive advantage, whether it's the literal terms in a document or the market data from all of the documents.
Yeah.
There's a lot that we can benefit from there. Of course, we need to get our clients understanding that they do want to come to us because the quality is going to be better, which is going to vary by client and how many times they've been around the block, really. But I think that will ultimately inure to benefits to us. But of course, for people who are just out there vibe coding documents, could be dangerous.
And I mean, every law firm out there has a specialism, and I think that for me, whichever law firm you're working for, you will be able to point at your document set and go, this is what makes us special. I know that what makes us special is these decades of experience working in working in innovation, and that mix of innovation versus innovative lawyering versus us understanding the operational, your experience of, you've been a lawyer, then you've gone and been operational within a business. From my experience, I've been a lawyer and then I've spent 20 odd years working in-house and been a COO, been a CFO, done other roles too, and still been a GC alongside that. And actually that's very typical of, the people we meet in this environment here at Wilson. That's what the special sauce is here. And I'm finding that just, for me, those are the things that get lost in the Gen AI evolution right now.
Yeah, and I think that, the more that clients understand the commoditizable pieces of our work, the more that, because they don't understand the rest of the work, they're just assuming, well, everything's commoditizable. Can't we just do this way? Can't we just do that way? There's a communication gap and almost like a marketing issue with how we describe and impart knowledge about our value proposition to clients that we're going to come to a reckoning with, I think, with all of this stuff. But, I think it's just the natural progression of tech disruption of an industry, and we just right now are finally maybe really going to be disrupted, and we're really in the crosshairs because of the natural language processing abilities of AI and its ability to automate cognitive tasks in a way that SaaS couldn't.
Yeah, and it's I keep on coming back to this when I'm talking to people about what do lawyers do. If lawyers draft documents, then lawyers have got a problem. But actually, if lawyers do something more than that, then maybe we are fine for now.
Yeah. I think that there will, for a long time, be a level of higher order of magnitude, contextual, like the cross-document and cross-time advising that lawyers are going to be the only people that can do, or the only things that can do, because AI is not going to be able to do it. Even if you crunch every document in NetDocs or the best ones, and you have the best precedents, and you can pull in the best, terms from other documents to make the best document, that still will fail to understand the context of the client, the people at the client, their leverage in the deal, the people at the other opposing party, opposing counsel, and the people there. There's going to still be that level of context that the AI is not going to be able to have for the foreseeable future, maybe someday.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, so we're in San Francisco at the moment, and I don't know if you're immune to this now, because I know that when you spend time in a place, you get immune to it. But I've been going around. I've been looking at all the adverts on the bus stops and different things like that, and I'm really enjoying the challenge of some of them. And there was one I saw which basically said, your employee can do 5 different things, roles, let's say. Our AI can do 2,000. Who are you going to hire? And I think that mindset, almost you need to take a step back from that right now and say, but yes, maybe it can do 2,000 different roles, but what have you lost in that process?
Right. What can it do, and what can it do well?
And 2 different questions,
exactly,
I guess.
Right? Because I think with all startups, this the classic scale too fast, build too many things, you can't maintain them, they don't work well, clients are unhappy, and then sometimes you fail. I mean, Atrium was a version of that story in some ways. I think that I would rather buy a tool that does a few things, AI tool or otherwise in some cases, that does a few things very well. And especially with AI, I don't know if I believe that it can do 2,000 things very well, just knowing the technology.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that I agree. I would encourage a startup, if I was, invested in them or advising them, to step back from that, try to do a few things very well. Yes, maybe you're still replacing one employee type because it can do 5 things very well, but you're doing that and allowing the customer to have confidence that it's being done well, instead of just them bringing in a fleet of these AI agents, getting rid of X team, whatever department, and then being unhappy, and then you're ripped out and they have to rehire those people.
Yeah, and I think that when we've talked in the past, we've talked about our approach on the approach that all these other chief innovation officers at law firms keep on telling me that we're doing so well. And I think about what you were just saying there about this idea that actually picking the right tool to do the right job. And I guess, as I was contemplating talking to you, I was thinking, actually, so much of that is about building trust in the system within the office, within Wilson Sonsini, which is, if we are building building the muscle to use AI well, we need to know that every single person can use the tool that you're providing, that they'll get confidence in that, and then we can move on to the next tool and the next tool. It's not trying to get one tool that will do everything for us, but to try to build it in a way that means that all our knowledge and resources are sitting there very accessible to the right tooling on top of it.
Right, and you need to have people understand the benefit to them. I mean, back to behavior, right? You're not going to get people just to change their behavior overnight without understanding why it benefits them at some level. And there are some kind of inherent benefits of, oh, this is easier. But what we try to do when we talk about kind of an innovation flywheel is, how do we intake feedback, tool requests? How do we decide what to do there and then tell people what we're doing, build what they want, get their feedback again, but then make sure that there is an output that they know either we didn't, you build what you wanted, or if we did build what you wanted, here's all the benefit that it gets you. So an example of that is if you have, for instance, AI indexing data in our contracts and we get market data, we want to present that to them in a dashboard where they can see the data. And that way, the next time that they do a deal, they're going to get that data indexed so that it goes back into the dashboard. And then it becomes the flywheel of, they know what we're building, they're engaged and are participating in it because they know the benefit that they're going to get on the back end. And you can apply that to, document drafting, market data, and all of the, AI things that are driven by data. Yeah. So we definitely want people to be understanding that benefit, because that's what drives behavior more than me just saying, hey, this tool's great. You are definitely going to want to use it.
Yeah, and I guess the other side of that, though, is this, it's almost a soft, I was going to say cautious, but it's not, maybe not cautious is not the right word for it. Considered approach. Let's call it considered approach to the adoption of AI within an organization. And this is, when I'm not talking about this organization necessarily, but organizationally, for many organizations, they're looking at this going, how do I, do I adopt it now? Do I slowly do it? Do I, rapidly hire, get the best, the best current tool out there and use these best current tools? And then I kind of, on the other side of it, I'm seeing this rush from the big companies to produce the one general tool. And is there a risk here that the one general tool will come along and then suddenly everything else is irrelevant?
I'm not bought in on the one general tool for legal, because I think that we're such a horizontal vertical and that it's just going to be difficult to get that right. What some of the current horizontal tools are doing to combat that is offering the ability to build your own things, apps within their tool. But you can do that in, much cheaper tools that are not trying to also force users into certain patterns of working. So what we've tried to do is allow people to get the benefit of that kind of build your own without forcing them to a particular way of doing the larger transactions, because that's where the trouble comes. And by the way, of course, those cost more money. And when, in my kind of estimation of how do we get the human behavior changed, it is not saying this is a great tool, use it. It's getting them comfortable with supervising AI. This isn't going to work like Excel. What are the things that are valuable to me from using AI, and why would I use it? Like my dashboard is going to show me all this data, or I'm going to have a drafting tool that's going to have my clause library that I want to use. That's what drives human behavior. And I think it's really easy to get FOMO, and I do all the time, of not moving quickly enough. But if you move faster than your users are able to bear, then you're not actually moving quickly. You're just moving, and then they have to catch up. And so the ultimate speed is how quickly you're deploying technology that's actually being adopted.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that law firms have always struggled with for various reasons, the billable hour and all of that. But I think now we're struggling with it in the kind of new paradigm of this supervising technology and all of that, which is why I've been trying to give my users time to get comfortable and get around the corner of that new paradigm before I just throw technology at them that, is millions of dollars that they don't use.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you talked about the billable hour, because, this is and this is not an exclusive Wilson Sonsini conversation. It's not an exclusive legal, law firm conversation. It's a conversation across the whole of the service industry. And we're looking at how you value the work you do, and to date, most service industries fall back on the billable hour in some shape or form. Even if they're trying to get a fixed fee for some piece of work, it comes back down to the number of billable hours they think it's going to cost, and go back to that again. And when we start talking about this kind of the system level change, that good enough stroke better than good enough technology will give us, there's some fundamental questions to ask here, isn't there, about we talk about innovation within a law firm, innovation within the service industry. Innovation doesn't then just mean the technology you're using. You have to think much more widely than that.
Yeah, I mean, we have many struggles in law with ROI of tech. Not only because the billable hour efficiency gains lead to a reduction in billable hours, but also because it's very difficult to measure quality in output. Even down to the fact of having to prove a negative, where it's like, we never got sued on this contract. You can't prove that if you never get sued. I'm going to die before they never get sued on the contract. So how do you measure that quality and say, hey, this was an airtight contract, unless you have timescales of 20, 50, whatever years? And so it's very difficult to get to value-based billing, because it's hard to measure value. So we need to come up with ways to do that. And again, that is going to be, in my mind, driven by clients and how they view value, because we can't do some of the more traditional things.
I think that's really interesting. So when I think about a couple of moments in time recently, where I've had clients who 20 years ago I was working with them, and 20 years ago we were talking about the fee an awful lot. And then 20 years later, they've come back and they've said to me, we saw what you did there. We know what you did. And so often that conversation is one of, we don't understand what are we paying you for, because nothing's going, we don't see, there aren't any challenges here. And actually, the very fact that they're not getting sued, to your point, or they're not having the problems they had previously, is because of your involvement. And 20 years later, you set them up for the 20 years later. Because as a senior lawyer, you were thinking back then, actually, this is what evolution looks like for this business. This is the exit they're going to be looking for over time. And, you've set them up for the exit 20 years ago. And, it's very hard to explain that to them at the time, because they don't see it, but you've had the conversations and you're trying to get that into it. And I guess it comes to when it comes to these legal tools, how much, and I hate to use the word understand, but I'm going to use it anyway, how much do these tools understand the motivations of people?
I mean, they don't.
To the extent I guess motivations exist in language. And if they can be communicated in language, it can be
captured. They can predict a statistical distribution of the way that humans might react. But knowing that they were just aggressive founders and you knew they were going to want to exit way sooner, are going to know that they're an outlier. And that's the key, is those outliers become and are such a crucial piece of what we do as attorneys, and that's just difficult to not only get AI to handle, but to impart to clients, because there's 50 in a given contract, and the client doesn't have the patience to sit through you explaining all the ways that you're trying to help them out with that.
I've got an event coming up in a couple of weeks' time, which is not a couple of weeks' time, it will be a couple of weeks' time when this podcast goes live, it's about how lawyers and GCs have to learn to operate at the edge of chaos. Because
Oh, boy.
chaos is, you've been in a house, I've been in a house for 20 odd years. The founders that you work with are, in order to be and do the things they do, there is a level of, and the word may not be chaos, maybe that may be not a fair word, and at the same time it feels like the
It's
right
very
word.
fair, yeah.
But you do chaos, and as lawyers, our job is to pin down people, and and the CFO again within an organization is trying to pin down and to try to bring things together. And often I've seen founders who are amazing inventors, amazing thinkers, not become the natural leaders over time. Over time, the natural leader is someone different. But these guys will just remain in an organization as the innovator. But they've almost got to be given a little kind of department of their own where they can innovate while they're doing that. But I think that whole idea of the lawyer, the chaos that you talk about, and us understanding what chaos looks like, but also how AI operates within that chaos. Because if you are trying to get something which is probabilistic to understand chaos, if it sees something chaotic, will it presume it's be successful? Or will it understand, or will it have to try to think what probabilistically that chaos will result in? I mean, there's so much there that, to come back to this idea of what do humans do? Is there, within all this, is there a part of this which says, we have, I hate the word feeling, because we know that feeling is more than feeling, because you've done neuroscience. It is a result of a whole bunch of experience, that you bring. The feeling comes from. Can we ever get there with a
Yeah.
technology?
I think that there's some future where we have quantum and traditional ML and LLMs working together, so you can get literally nonlinear chaos handled by quantum. You get the deterministic symbolic stuff, and you get LLMs kind of running on top of it to do the natural language, where we can get close.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how effective we will be at kind of assimilating the various different things that, as you're talking about in the chaos, you need to assimilate to make a decision, because they're not always obviously adjacent to one another, and so you wouldn't be training the AI on them. And so I think that it's going to at minimum be a long time. And I always like to call humans like a quantum meat computer. Until we get quantum involved, I don't think that we're going to have that jump up in processing power and ability to handle uncertainty that we need to replicate humans.
I find that's fascinating, because there's so many things you read about where we are hearing that the way in which computers are now working today outpaces the way in which humans can think. But what you're saying there, and I come back to, as a neuroscientist, somebody who understands behavior, what you're saying is fundamentally something different there. You're saying that actually we are nowhere near yet today a computer's ability to process the way in which a human can process, I guess, the variety of data?
Yes, and it's the amount of processing power, per square inch in your brain at some level. But, when you look at a neural network and, there's nodes, you need I think it's like a 7-layer neural network to replicate one neuron in your brain, because there's so many channels that, neurotransmitters are going through to get the action potential, and then there's neurotransmitters going in both ways to tell it kind of how to react. So there's just so many feedback loops that you can't replicate that, even though we call them neurons, neural nodes, whatever, in a neural network, without 7 layers of nodes. So I think that there's a fundamental order of magnitude or multiple level of mismatch between what a neural network is doing right now and what our brains can do. But some of that is processing power. It's not all actually ability to do things well, because ultimately our brains are doing a similar thing to a neural network where we're trying to make predictions, and then we're amending our predictions based on the feedback that we get from the real world.
I am doing my absolute best to avoid the next question, because I don't want to wrap up the conversation at all, but you're leading me there. So I'm going to ask you the next question, and then we're going to carry on talking afterwards. Because my final question, usually at these interviews, is in a world of AGI, what does it mean to be human? And we're getting there in the conversation. You're saying that if we are just, what's the word? Meat processors?
Quantum meat computers.
Quantum meat computers. If that's all we are, then there will come a point in time where the computer overtakes the quantum meat computer. So at that point, what does it mean to be human?
Yeah, it's a tough question, and it's one I don't really have a satisfactory answer to. I think ultimately it's going to be, once, assuming AGI is actually going to be able to process all of the visual and auditory information that we can process, because that's another thing that really differentiates us from LLMs right now. Is I think it's something like a 4-year-old has processed more data than the largest LLM because of all of the other sensory inputs. So we'll assume that this is a real robot that can move in the world.
Okay.
And it has quantum. I still think that there are emergent properties in our intelligence, brain, I don't know about soul, that are going to differentiate us. But I wouldn't be shocked if it was really difficult to distinguish between true AGI, not the new definitions of AGI, which the bar keeps getting lower and lower, but something that has, the quantum, all the senses, all of that. I think I could see a world where it gets pretty close to us, but I guess it's maybe partially, an anthropomorphic centered point of view that I think that there's something different.
I like Noah Yuval Harari's point on this, which is let's stop talking about artificial intelligence and talk about alien intelligence instead. And when you start talking about alien intelligence, the benefit of that is that you then don't try to make it like us. You try to understand that it's a different type of intelligence. And so while we don't recognize it as our intelligence, it is intelligent.
Right.
So when you start talking about intelligence in that way, then it challenges a whole bunch of things, in terms of, does it need to be a robot? No, it doesn't need to be a robot. It can be something have a completely different form. Can humans... can humans interact with it? Well, we already know that AI systems and the LLMs have their own language that when they're talking to, and it's talking to itself, it has loads of shortcuts. I mean, and when I say that, I know I am talking about talking, and there's even that is is trying to humanize it in a way that it's not necessarily doing that. It is communicating with itself in a way that we would not recognize as communication, and yet it does it, and it does it in a very fast, rapid way. And then we ask it a question, it goes away and does its thinking in a different way, and then it comes back and translates it back into human speak for us. So within that system, and we talk about what it means to be human, for me there's a real challenge, because you've got two separate things running in parallel here, which is the evolution of the computer going in one direction, and then we've got the conversations that I was having in the Vatican earlier on this year with what it means to be human, because what are we trying to preserve for humanity here?
Yeah, I mean, I will always default back to science.
Well, that's what I'm hoping for.
So it's what it means to be human at that level, because you raise a good point that we don't need to literally recreate a human in like a robot suit that looks like a human with a human brain. It is the literal function of our brain and the mix of neurotransmitters that are shooting off all day to help me navigate the world, learn, have reward systems that make me repeat behaviors. That is ultimately what makes us love and fear and, have hope and joy, and all of that is derived in your brain. And so unless you're literally going to rebuild that, which, as you mentioned, we don't need to do to get an intelligence, then there's always going to be a difference in being human, because those emergent qualities from our quantum meat computer are going to create a view of the world that's different than another creature or an entity.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the earlier question, really, which is about human intelligence and what aspects of human intelligence matters most. And I think when you start talking about that, I think things like ethics and responsibility, but not responsibility in terms of blame, not the human crumple zone I mentioned earlier on, but that idea to, we can take responsibility to do something, and we can make ourselves, we can empower ourselves in that way. Maybe those are the things that are human.
Yeah,
aspects.
I mean, even the fact that we understand those concepts and put them to action in the world is part of the human condition, right? There's this German word called Umwelt, that is what an animal sees based on its own brain. So like a bat's Umwelt is, whatever echolocation looks like. Ours is determined by the perceptual stopgaps in our brain. And so some people who have, color blindness or something have a slightly different Umwelt than like the normal human. If you build an artificial intelligence that is AGI in the sense that it can learn from the tasks that you give it, and it's accruing intelligence all over the course of its life, it might never have to learn some of the things that we do about social interaction and working in groups, because it's kind of just doing its own thing. And yeah, it's really smart and it's technically AGI, but it doesn't have that Umwelt, and it doesn't operate in the world at the orders of magnitude that we have to, or on the kind of the social mores that we have to manage.
Annie, I'm very aware that in the background I heard a clock bell go, which meant actually about 5 minutes ago, I think it was, we were out of time and we've carried on talking. Thank you so much. Normally I'd say, do you have any questions to my interviewee? Do you have any questions for me?
I mean, I would love to know what are the trends, what are the clients looking for? Because as you've probably heard, I'm very client driven on what we need to do and where we need to go. And so you have the kind of finger on the pulse there.
I will have that conversation with you off camera. But thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to me today. I really appreciate it. I know how busy you are. And so great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Just so you know, this podcast is for general information only. It's definitely not legal advice, and it doesn't create a lawyer-client relationship. Laws change, and they can be different where you live. So please don't rely on this when making decisions. If you need advice, speak to a lawyer. Every now and then, platforms might pop links or extra content alongside this podcast. They're not from me or Wilson Sonsini, and in some places, this episode counts as attorney advertising.